only Andrew Yang, man who scarcely needs an introduction, but for those who are not in the know,
our audience.
Of course, yeah. Former presidential candidate, of course, co-chair of the Forward Party. It's always great to see you, Andrew.
Good to see you, man.
It's great to be here. Wish it was under different circumstances. I take it we're going to be debriefing the Trump landslide.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're one of those people who's in a position to say, hey, I told you so, because you got behind Dean Phillips, who was out there saying, listen, guys, Biden is too old. Like, it doesn't have to be me. Just do something other than Joe Biden. How critical do you think it was that Biden stayed in the race for as long as he did?
Joe Biden essentially delivered the White House back to Donald Trump by not getting out of the way in January. And
so what he's talking about, if you're familiar with Dean Phillips, he ran for the presidency. He was running around a year ago. He was saying Biden's too old. He was saying that he should drop out. And he was heavily dismissed. People were acting like he didn't know what he was talking about. And it turns out that Dean Phillips, Andrew Yang, they were right the whole time.
Credit to Dean for risking his career. The Dems, in true Demi fashion, decided to malign him, primary him, get him out of the picture because they were more offended that someone was actually cutting the line than making the right case for the country. He was correct then. Joe Biden ends up dropping out less than 6 months later, and it was a train wreck. If they'd had a primary in January, you could have seen a very, very competitive ticket emerge. Let's call it Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer. You then have two of the three crucial swing states probably in your column. You win Wisconsin and you win the whole thing, but we'll never know because instead it was Joe all the way. And if you can sense some emotion in my voice, we should all be ticked off, particularly Dean Phillips, because Dean Phillips was right all along.
Can I ask you just a little bit more about that, Andrew? Because, you know, there's been reporting that came out after Biden had that disastrous debate that was like.
And look, I can't say 100% that a different candidate would have won. It's hard to say, but the way that it happened was not ideal, for sure. Her having a super short period of time to try to pull a campaign together when look at how she did in 2020.
Yeah, donors had seen this was really not good. He had some meeting with congressional leaders like a long time ago where he couldn't finish his sentences. Nancy Pelosi had to jump in. And then they just stopped having those meetings altogether. So This had all happened before Dean jumped in and was saying, guys, come on, I'm pulling the alarm bell. Like, you have to do something. So I just want to know behind the scenes, like, what was going on? Were they in denial? They just thought that they could cover it up? What was the thought process behind the scenes to the best of your knowledge?
Oh, yeah, it was common knowledge. And there were people saying to Dean, I agree with you. I'm glad you're doing this. But then they would be mum in public. And the truth is that the rank and file Dem office holder cared more about their place in the totem pole than whether the party was on track to win in November. That's the disease of this current system is that, look, you know, I've got my career progression. I've got my entire jam. What happens to the country? What happens to the people, families, community?
So what is pointing out here is that there's a lot of groupthink. The incentives don't align well. And so it's like basically those that are in power, they're incentivized to just go along. They're not incentivized to try to push for something new. They're not incentivized to try to really troubleshoot and analyze if the candidates are the best. It's just Dean Phillips, if I remember right, he wasn't able to get an interview with CNN. It's just awful incentive structure where people are basically encouraged to just shut up and step in line.
A distant secondary or tertiary consideration.
That is absolutely devastating.
That is really. Andrew, I wanted to talk to you more about this loss and kind of where things go from here. What is your theory of some of the different ways that the Democrats got it wrong?
You know, I was joking that instead of calling themselves the Democrats, they should start calling themselves the selectors, because if you'd actually had a real competitive primary, you're not in this mess. They still even had a chance to have a hurried primary when Joe dropped out in July, and instead it was just the elevation of Kamala. I made a list of recommendations for the Democratic Party in Politico a few days ago that I say in the piece they will totally ignore these. One of them is to make Dean Phillips the chair of the DNC as the only person who had the integrity to stake his career on what was right for the country. Another is apologize to Bernie Sanders for sandbagging him in 2016. In my opinion, if Bernie's the nominee, then Trump never becomes president in 2016. So there are a bunch of things that you'd hope that they would take from this, but you don't actually have any optimism that they will, because the dynamic I described before is that there are now various people.
Those suggestions that he gives, I agree. Dean Phillips should be lauded and praised for having the foresight that he did when he was treated so awfully over it. But of course, these people aren't going to take what Andrew Yang's saying here. And yeah, I'm agreeing with what he says on Bernie.
Jockeying to be the party's nominee in 28. And again, it's about them and their place in the party and not necessarily preventing this loss.
Yeah.
It was a landslide loss that, as my friend Dean Phillips said, was both predictable and preventable.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I think there's a few things I want to pick up on there from your comments. I want to come back to your assessment that Bernie.
Another person who's similar to Dean in this is Cenk Uygur. You can criticize Cenk, you can say he's extreme, but he will criticize the Democrat Party. He'll criticize Dems, and he was saying, similar to Dean, he was saying Biden is too old, he can't handle it, and he was pushed aside. He was trying to run. I mean, he had kind of a steep hill to climb because he's not like, as a citizen, he wasn't born here, and so he was trying to basically get them to change the Constitution. But Cenk, for all the criticisms that someone can have against him or saying that he's extreme, he was right on this issue.
Would have won in 2016 because you and Bernie don't have exactly the same ideology. So I'm curious about your analysis there, which of course I agree with, but I want to hear your perspective on that. But the one thing I wanted to ask you about first is, it's also a real indictment of Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, these people who, could have jumped into a Democratic primary and really forced the issue. And yeah, it would have been tough and people would have been mad at them and whatever. But if you've got the governor of California, the governor of Michigan, some actual heavy hitters in the Democratic primary, it makes it much more difficult to just effectively cancel the primary, which is what they truly did. Obviously, they had no debates. And on certain states, they just literally canceled the primary and blocked Marianne and Dean and Cenk and anyone else from getting on the ballot. So how much of an indictment do you see this as, the people who are supposed to be the big star players coming up in the Democratic Party and their own career ambition and cowardice when it came down to it?
Yeah, it's not very presidential to just be like, oh, maybe I'll just wait
my turn
until I have the blessing of the powers that be. And certainly Gavin Newsom and J.B. Pritzker are well known to have had campaigns in waiting. But as someone who ran for president, guys, if you wait for the right time, there may never be a right time. You know what the right time is? The right time for the freaking country, not necessarily your professional prospects. Again, it's one reason why Dean Phillips has my eternal admiration, because he clearly did not have his professional, his political future in mind. And his career has been ended as a result politically, though you guys think that, he could easily rise like a phoenix, which he could, because everyone now knows that he did the right thing. But that's unusual in American politics. We have a system.
What they're saying about Dean, I mean, I was paying attention to this a year ago, and I was thinking, like, I think this guy's right. Like, I would hope that people would give him credit now and that they'd recognize just how right he actually was. It's I don't know. It's crazy the way that it all played out. I think that the Dems have a lot of evaluating to do. I've done other videos about Sam Harris looking at how Dems are associated with certain cultural issues, social issues like transgender bathrooms and defense of Islam. And I think that there's a lot of analyzing to do, and that they'd be better off to go more kind of Bernie Sanders populist economics, focusing more on an economics message than anything else, and doing everything they can to try to get Black voters, Latino voters back. Thanks for watching. Go ahead, like and subscribe for more videos.